Hello, English learners, and welcome. I'm your host, Paul. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Excited to chat about English learning today.
Today, we are diving into something that I think a lot of English learners can relate to. That feeling of just getting stuck when you are trying to speak English.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
you hit this mental wall, the words just vanish, you start a sentence and then trail off, and the whole conversation just feels like you're trying to trudge through mud.
It is.
So if any of that sounds familiar, then you are in the right place. We have been going through a bunch of research and different articles on this topic to figure out why this happens, and more importantly, how to break through it.
Yeah, that's right.
So during this deep dive, we are going to be talking about speaking more smoothly and thinking in English faster. And most importantly, how to just avoid freezing up in conversations.
Exactly.
Think of it like this. Our mission today is to equip you with the tools and strategies you need to boost your English speaking confidence. So
Absolutely.
you can just express yourself more freely without constantly hesitating.
Totally.
So I want you to take a second and think back to the last time you felt stuck while speaking English.
And I want you to try and remember what that actually felt like.
Mhm.
Keep that feeling in mind while we go through some of the reasons why this happens. Because the research we've been looking at points to some really interesting key areas.
Yeah, for sure. One of the biggest factors that kept popping up in all the stuff we've read is the lack of confidence.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's kind of this weird paradox.
Right.
You are so afraid of making mistakes that it ends up causing you to make the exact mistakes you were trying to avoid.
Wow.
Yeah, we even came across this one study, I think it was in a psychology journal or something,
Okay.
and they basically found that learners with higher anxiety levels were way more likely to hesitate. And they would even forget words that they knew. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I can totally see that. Like when you are worried about messing up, it's like your brain just goes into overdrive trying to avoid making mistakes. And it ends up backfiring. It's almost like there's too much pressure.
It's funny because when you think about native English speakers, I mean, we make mistakes all the time.
We do.
We use the wrong tense, we stumble over our words, but we just keep going. It's like we've kind of built up this resilience to those little slip-ups.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to, I think, resilience. And that ties into another big point from our research, which is fear of judgment.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like so many of the articles talked about how much the fear of judgment really gets to people. This idea that you are going to get laughed at or that people will think you're stupid if you say something wrong. It can be really paralyzing for English learners. Have you ever felt that way?
Absolutely, yeah. Like you just don't want to say anything because you're so worried about messing up.
Yeah.
And it ends up making you feel isolated too. And then you also have the very real challenge of limited vocabulary.
Yeah.
You know what you want to say, but you just don't have the English words for it.
Yeah, you just hit a wall.
Yeah, exactly. It's so frustrating.
Totally.
Hmm.
But what's interesting is that the research suggests that fluency doesn't necessarily mean knowing every single word in the dictionary. It's more about being resourceful, learning how to work around the gaps in your vocabulary by explaining things in a different way with the words that you do know.
Oh, that's a really good point. So it's not just about memorizing tons of words. It's more about being creative with the words you already have.
Exactly.
And another thing that we saw over and over again in our notes was overthinking grammar. Like that urge to create this perfectly grammatical sentence in your head before you even open your mouth. It's a recipe for disaster.
Totally. Because while it's important to have a good understanding of grammar ultimately,
Right, of course.
in that moment when you were speaking, you can't get too hung up on it. Because
Yeah.
it's like you are doing all these mental gymnastics just to answer a simple question.
Yeah, it's like your brain is just overloaded. It's too much.
Exactly. And I think all of these points tie into the last key factor, which is lack of practice.
Oh yeah, practice is everything, right?
Yeah. So many people spend hours watching English TV shows and movies,
Which is great.
which is great,
Yeah.
but it's not the same as actively practicing speaking.
Yeah.
One of the articles we read made a really good analogy. It said that learning a language is like learning an instrument. Just listening to music isn't going to make you a musician. You have to actually play it.
That's such a good point.
You have to use the language to get better at it.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself getting stuck a lot,
Yeah.
it might not be because you are bad at English. It might just be a sign that you need more targeted speaking practice.
That's actually really encouraging because it means that this feeling of being stuck isn't permanent.
Right.
It's something that we can work on. And this actually brings us to our first set of solutions.
Mm-hmm.
which are all about shifting your mindset.
Okay.
Because like you were saying earlier, the research really shows that what you believe about your ability to speak English has a huge impact on how well you actually speak it.
Exactly. Like if you tell yourself that English is too hard for you or that you're just not good at languages, it's going to create this mental block.
Right.
We saw this study about linguistic psychology,
Interesting.
and they talked about how negative self-talk actually makes you less motivated and more anxious. And then you end up feeling stuck.
It's like a vicious cycle. You don't think you can do it, so you don't even try,
Right.
and you just get more and more stuck. So instead of thinking that way, what if you start to think of English as a skill that you can develop
Yeah.
with the right effort and the right strategies? Because that's a total game changer.
Totally.
And one of the biggest mindset shifts that we saw repeated over and over in all of our sources is letting go of perfection. Because we tend to think that a fluent speaker is someone who never makes a mistake, someone who always knows the right word and speaks with perfect grammar. But that's just not realistic.
No, it's not realistic at all. Even native English speakers make mistakes all the time. We pause, we say, we forget what we're going to say. Fluency isn't about being perfect. It's about being able to comfortably and confidently express yourself.
Right.
So you can get your point across, even if you make a few mistakes along the way, you know? It's kind of like if you waited until the rain stopped to build an ark.
Right. You'd never get anything done.
Exactly. You just got to start.
You just got to jump in.
Yeah.
I love that analogy. And speaking of imperfections, let's talk about mistakes.
Yeah.
Because for so many English learners, a mistake feels like the end of the world.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's
More.
proof that they are bad at English.
Right.
But actually, the Lenny science research shows that's completely the wrong way to look at it.
Yeah, exactly. Think about it this way.
Okay.
Every time you learn something new, you're going to make mistakes. It's part of the process.
Of course.
Like when a baby learns to walk, they don't just stand up and start sprinting around.
Not at all.
They fall down, they stumble, they get back up, and they try again.
Right.
And every time they fall down, they are learning something new. They're adjusting their balance and coordinating their movements. And it's the same thing with language learning.
It's all part of the process.
Yeah, your mistakes are actually giving you valuable information about what you need to work on.
Oh, I like that.
It's feedback.
Yeah, instead of looking at a mistake as a sign that you are bad at English, look at it as an opportunity to learn and grow.
Exactly.
So the next time you make a mistake in English, what should you do?
Well, you can do a couple of things.
Okay.
The first thing is to just acknowledge it. You made a mistake. It happens. Then try to quickly learn from it if you can. And then move on. Don't dwell on it.
Okay, so don't let it get you down.
Yeah, and this might sound a little strange, but try to develop a sort of neutral attitude towards your mistakes.
Okay.
Think of them as data points in your learning journey.
I like that. Data points, not judgments.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've been talking about letting go of perfection and reframing how we think about mistakes. But there's another powerful mindset shift that came up a lot in the research, which is all about how you see yourself. Instead of thinking, I am just learning English, start to say to yourself, I am an English speaker. Because when you identify as an English speaker, it can really change how you approach using the language.
Yeah, that's right. Because sometimes when people think of themselves as just a learner, it's like they are putting English in this separate category. Like it's something they're working towards but haven't fully achieved yet.
Right.
But if you start to tell yourself, I am an English speaker, it helps you embrace your current ability,
Right.
even if it's not perfect.
Okay, so it's about owning it, embracing where you are right now.
Exactly.
Okay, so I have a challenge for everyone listening.
Okay.
If you feel comfortable, I want you to say this out loud right now.
Okay.
I am an English speaker. I can speak English with confidence.
I love that.
It might feel weird at first,
Yeah.
but even that small affirmation can really start to change how you think about yourself and your abilities.
Absolutely. And the research actually backs this up. Yeah. When you believe in your ability to communicate in English, you are much more likely to look for opportunities to practice.
That makes sense.
And all that practice just builds more and more confidence and fluency.
It's a positive feedback loop.
Yeah. And it starts with that shift in how you see yourself.
I love that.
So you go from, I am learning English to, I am an English speaker.
Powerful stuff.
Powerful stuff.
Okay, so just to do a quick recap on these mindset shifts.
Okay.
Number one, accept that you don't have to be perfect to be fluent.
Absolutely.
Number two, look at your mistakes as learning opportunities, not failures.
Right.
And number three, tell yourself that you are an English speaker, not just a learner.
Yes.
Now, with all that in mind, let's move on to our next solution, which is about training your brain to think in English. This is huge. This was something that came up over and over again in everything we read as a key way to break free from that feeling of getting stuck.
It really is huge.
Mm.
Because I think one of the biggest roadblocks that a lot of English learners face is this habit of translating in their heads. Oh, yeah. Like they have a thought in their native language, and then they try to mentally translate it into English word for word.
Right.
And by the time they've done all that, the conversation has moved on, or they've completely forgotten what they wanted to say.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's like there's a delay.
Yeah, it's like having a translator in your head constantly whispering in your ear.
Right.
And it just slows everything down. The research really emphasizes that this reliance on translation can actually make you feel even more stuck.
So how do we break free from that? What's the alternative?
The goal is to stop translating altogether and start thinking directly in English. Because when your thoughts are already in English, the words just flow out of your mouth so much easier.
Right, makes sense.
This means you'll be able to speak faster, and it will sound more natural. And you'll also feel more confident because you aren't trying to juggle two languages in your head at the same time.
So it's like getting rid of that middleman.
Exactly. You cut out the translator.
Okay, but how do you actually train your brain to do that? That sounds like a pretty big shift. What are some practical things that we can start doing right away to get there?
Well, there are a few really effective techniques that kept popping up in our research.
Okay, let's hear it.
One of the simplest ones, which is actually really powerful, is to just start describing objects around you in English. Right now, just take a look around the room.
Okay.
And try to label things in English. And don't just say the basic noun like chair or table. Try adding an adjective or two, like that's a comfortable wooden chair, or this is a large round table.
Okay.
Adding those details helps to really solidify those English connections in your brain.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's something you can practice anywhere.
Right.
Anytime. You don't need any special materials.
Like a little mental workout.
It is.
I like it. Okay. What else? What's another technique that we can try?
Another really good one is to start narrating your daily routines to yourself in English. So like when you wake up in the morning, while you are making breakfast, when you're on your way to work or school, just try to make these little sentences in English about what you're doing.
So just thinking out loud.
Yeah. Like, I am getting out of bed. I am making a cup of coffee. I am walking to the bus stop.
Okay.
It sounds so simple, but it really helps to connect those everyday actions and thoughts with English words. And it starts to build up this automatic association between what you're doing and the English language.
So basically, you are trying to make English the default language in your head.
Yeah. It's
for everything that you do.
even the most basic things.
Even brushing your teeth.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
There's another really good technique that came up, which is to have silent conversations with yourself in English.
Okay.
So like if you have a few minutes of downtime, just imagine that you are having a conversation with someone in English
Okay.
and ask yourself basic questions and answer them in English.
So what kinds of questions are we talking about here? Just simple things like, what are my plans for this evening? What kind of food do I want to eat for dinner?
Okay.
It might feel strange at first,
It might.
but it's a really great way to practice forming thoughts and sentences in English without any pressure.
That's a good one.
Right.
Now, what about if you're thinking in English and you come across a word that you don't know? What do you do then? Do you have to stop and look it up?
Well, it can be tempting to switch back to your native language to find the translation. But the research is pretty clear on this. Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Instead, try to describe the word in English using words that you do know.
Okay, so like if you can't remember the word for umbrella,
Right.
you could say it's the thing you use to keep dry when it's raining.
Exactly. That's perfect.
Okay.
Because it forces you to think about the word in a different way. And it helps you develop the ability to communicate even when your vocabulary isn't perfect.
So you are basically training your brain to be more resourceful.
Exactly.
I like it.
And that's what it's all about.
Awesome. Okay, so let's do a quick recap of those brain training techniques. Number 1,
Right.
actively name and describe objects in English.
Right.
Number 2, narrate your daily routine in English.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3, have silent conversations with yourself in English. And number 4, if you don't know a word, try to describe it using other English words.
Exactly. Even if you just practice these techniques for a few minutes each day, it can really make a big difference. It can help your brain start thinking in English more automatically.
Yeah.
And the more you think in English, the more fluent you'll become. And you'll probably find yourself getting stuck a lot less often.
So good.
Yeah, it really works.
So we've talked about the importance of mindset and how to actually start thinking in English. But let's move on to our next solution, which is all about active learning strategies.
Okay.
We looked at a lot of research about this, and the general consensus is that passively absorbing English isn't always the most effective way to improve your fluency and get over that stuck feeling.
Yeah, for sure. So while things like watching movies and listening to music in English are definitely helpful, it's not enough to make you a confident and fluent speaker. You need to be more proactive.
Right. So what are some of the active learning techniques that people recommend?
Well, one that kept coming up over and over again is called shadowing.
Shadowing.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of that?
I think so. Can you explain it?
Yeah, so basically you listen to a native English speaker and then you repeat what they say at the same time.
Okay.
So it's almost like you are their echo.
Oh, okay. I see.
And this is a really good way to improve your pronunciation, your intonation, your rhythm, and even your overall confidence in how you sound when you speak English.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty cool. What's the best way to actually practice shadowing?
So what you can do is find a short audio or video clip, maybe a few sentences from a podcast or a YouTube video or something, and then you listen to it once just to get the general idea of what they're saying. And then you listen to it again. And this time you try to repeat what you hear at the same time as the speaker and try to copy their speed and their intonation as closely as you can.
So matching them.
Yeah, exactly. And don't worry too much about understanding every single word in the beginning.
Okay.
The most important thing is just to get your mouth and your brain used to the sounds and rhythms of English.
Okay, so you're basically training your mouth to make those English sounds more naturally.
That's exactly it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So that's shadowing. What's another active learning technique?
Another one that's really great is what we call the 5-second rule for responding.
Okay.
So basically, whenever someone asks you a question in English, you want to push yourself to start answering within 5 seconds.
Within 5 seconds.
Yeah, even if you are not 100% sure of what you want to say or if it's not the most perfect answer.
Well-
Because this forces you to think on your feet, and it
Mhm.
helps you to access your existing English knowledge a lot faster. Instead of getting bogged down by translating in your head or trying to construct the most grammatically perfect sentence. Because let's face it, in real conversations, you usually don't have a lot of time to carefully craft your responses.
Yeah, you just got to go with it.
That's right. And this 5-second rule is basically a way to train your brain to think quickly and to trust your instincts.
I love that because I think that's something that a lot of English learners struggle with. They get so caught up in trying to say the perfect thing that they end up saying nothing at all.
Absolutely. And that's what we want to avoid.
Exactly. We want to keep that conversation flowing.
That's right.
All right. What's another active learning method that we can try?
Here's a really good one. Try to explain something to someone else in English.
Okay.
It could be anything. It doesn't matter if the person you are talking to is also learning English,
Right.
or if it's a friend who doesn't even speak English at all, or if you are just explaining something out loud to yourself.
Okay.
The important thing is to actually say it out loud, because when you verbalize something in English, it helps to cement that knowledge in your brain.
Great.
You know, there's that saying, the
Yeah.
best way to learn something is to teach it.
I love it.
And it's true.
yeah.
So next time you learn something new, try to explain it to someone else in English. It's a really effective way to practice.
Because it forces you to really understand the concepts and to use the vocabulary in a real way.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, one more active learning strategy before we move on.
Okay.
What else have we got?
This one's pretty simple. Try writing short daily summaries in English.
Okay.
So at the end of each day, just take a few minutes to think back on what you did and then write down 3 to 5 sentences summarizing your day.
Okay, so just a quick recap of the day
Yeah,
in English.
Mhm.
And is this like in a journal or something?
It can be in a journal, or you can just write it on a piece of paper or in a note on your phone. Doesn't really matter where you write it.
Okay.
The important thing is to just get those thoughts down in English.
Okay, okay.
It's just a really easy way to practice both thinking and writing in English on a daily basis.
Love it. All right, so we've got shadowing, we've got the 5-second response rule,
right.
actively teaching others in English, and writing daily short summaries.
Yeah, those are the main ones.
These are all such practical techniques that people can actually start using right away.
Absolutely. And the best part is you don't need any fancy materials or resources.
Yeah?
You can do these things anywhere, anytime.
So there are no more excuses.
No more excuses.
You got to get out there and practice.
That's right. Make it a habit.
Now that we've covered all those active learning techniques, let's move on to our fourth area, which is all about keeping conversations flowing smoothly.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Because let's face it, a lot of English learners experience this thing. I know I have. Where you're having a conversation, it's
Right.
going pretty well, And then all of a sudden your mind just goes blank.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
You don't know what to say next. There's this awkward silence. And then you start feeling stuck all over again.
Totally. I've definitely been there.
Yeah, and the research actually had some really good tips on how to avoid those awkward silences and keep the conversation moving.
For sure. One of the simplest and most effective techniques is to use filler words and phrases.
Fillers.
Yeah. So, like, instead of just sitting there silently while you try to think of what to say next,
Okay.
you can use phrases like, "That's a good question. Let me think about that for a second." Or, "That's an interesting point."
Okay.
Just these little things to buy yourself some time without making it awkward.
Yeah, they kind of act like bridges to keep the conversation going while you gather your thoughts.
Exactly. And another really important tip is to get good at asking follow-up questions
Okay.
instead of just giving short yes or no answers, which can kind of kill the conversation.
Yeah, totally.
Try to add a little bit more to your response and then ask a question back to the other person.
Okay, so like if someone says, I enjoyed that movie,
Right.
instead of just saying, me too, I could say something like, yeah, I did too. I really liked the ending. What was your favorite part?
Exactly. Perfect. That's exactly what I mean.
That's so smart because it takes the pressure off you to always be coming up with new topics.
It does.
Yeah.
And it shows the other person that you are actually listening and that you're interested in what they have to say.
It's a win-win.
It is.
Now, what if you were really drawing a blank?
Well, that happens sometimes.
Yeah, of course. It happens to all of us.
And when it does, just remember those trusty WH questions.
The WH questions. Can you remind me what those are again?
So those are the questions that start with what, why, how, where, when, and who.
Oh, right.
And you can use those to ask just about anything like, what do you mean by that? Or why do you think that happened? Or how did you find out about that? You know, that kind of thing.
Those are really good.
Yeah, they are super helpful for getting more information from the other person and for keeping the conversation from fizzling out.
Love it. Okay,
Yeah.
what else? What other conversation tips did we find in our research?
Another really good technique is paraphrasing.
Paraphrase.
So that's where you basically repeat what the other person said,
Okay.
but in your own words.
Got it.
And this is useful for a few different reasons.
Okay.
First of all, it shows the other person that you're really paying attention. And it also helps you to avoid those awkward silences because it gives you a little bit of time to think about what you want to say next.
Okay, so if someone says something like, I am feeling really stressed about this deadline at work,
Right.
I could say, so the deadline is really stressing you out. Is there anything specific that you are worried about?
Exactly. Perfect.
Okay.
It shows that you are listening, and it also gives you a moment to process what they said and think about how you want to respond.
Smart.
It's a good trick.
Yeah.
And I think this all ties into the last point, which is something we've talked about before. But it's really important to remember, especially when you're in the middle of a conversation,
What is it?
don't be afraid to make mistakes. I know it can be scary, but the more you talk, the more comfortable you will get. And the less likely you are to freeze up in a conversation.
Right.
And remember, mistakes are part of the process.
Exactly.
They're how we learn.
Don't let the fear of making a mistake stop you from talking.
That's right.
Okay, so to wrap up our conversation tips,
Mhm.
Number 1, use filler phrases to buy yourself some time to think.
Yeah.
Number 2, ask follow-up questions to keep the conversation going.
Right.
Number 3, don't be afraid to use those WH questions.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4, paraphrase what the other person says.
That's a good one.
And number 5, above all, don't let the fear of making mistakes stop you from talking.
Yes, that's so important.
All right, now we've talked about mindset, we've talked about thinking in English, we've talked about active learning and keeping conversations flowing. Our last area of focus for this deep dive is building daily English habits.
Oh,
Because consistency is key when you're trying to learn a language.
it really is.
You can't just cram it all in once a week and expect to become fluent. You need to make English a regular part of your life.
Yeah, that's the key.
And the research actually shows that even if you only spend a short amount of time each day engaging with English,
Right.
it can make a big difference over time.
It really adds up.
It does.
Yeah.
And you'll be less likely to feel stuck because you'll be constantly reinforcing your learning.
Absolutely. And you know what? You don't have to move to an English-speaking country to do this.
You don't?
Nope.
Okay, how?
There are tons of ways that you can immerse yourself in English right now,
Really?
no matter where you live.
Okay. I'm all ears. What are some practical things we can start doing right away?
Well, one really easy thing is to just change the language settings on your phone and your computer to English.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just do it. You'll be surprised at how much new vocabulary you pick up just by using your devices in English.
Right. It's like you're constantly surrounded by English.
Yeah, exactly. You're getting exposed to it all the time without even trying.
Genius. What's another easy habit we can try?
Start following English-speaking content creators on social media.
Okay, so like on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok.
Exactly. Whatever platforms you are already using, just find some people who are creating content in English that you enjoy.
Right.
And start following them because
Okay.
it's a great way to see how real people are using English in a natural way.
And it doesn't feel like you're studying.
Yeah, that's
You're
good.
just enjoying the
Yes.
content.
Okay, what else? Another one is to actively think in English while you are doing everyday things.
Okay, so like when you're cooking or getting dressed.
Yeah, or taking a shower or walking the dog.
Okay,
Just try to describe what you're doing in your head in English.
so basically narrating your life in English.
Yeah, exactly.
I like it. And isn't this kind of like what we were talking about before with narrating your daily routine?
It is,
Uh,
but this time you are actually doing the actions,
Right.
so it makes it even more real.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so like if you're making dinner, you might think to yourself, I am chopping the vegetables. I am boiling the water. I am setting the table.
Okay.
You know?
Right.
Easy stuff.
Easy peasy. All right, do me another one.
Right, this one's a little bit different, but it's a good one. Try labeling things around your house with sticky notes.